You have heard this phrase your whole life. Turn the other cheek. Most people think it means stay quiet, accept the hit, and let people walk all over you. But that is not what Jesus was teaching in Matthew chapter 5. And once you understand the culture he was speaking into, this verse stops sounding like weakness and starts sounding like something else entirely. Jesus says it plainly. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. On the surface, it sounds like a call to passive suffering. Roll over. Let people hurt you again. But biblical scholars who study the social customs of first-century Judea have shown that this passage is doing something far more precise and far more radical than simple submission. Start with the smallest detail in the verse. It says the right cheek specifically. Not just any cheek, the right cheek. Why would that detail matter? Because in the ancient world, striking someone on the right cheek almost always meant a backhanded slap. Think about how a right-handed person naturally strikes another person's right cheek. It requires the back of the hand. And, in first-century Jewish and Roman culture, a backhand slap was not primarily about causing physical pain. It was a gesture of humiliation, used specifically to put someone in their place. Masters backhanded slaves, husbands backhanded wives, Romans backhanded Jews, superiors backhanded subordinates. It was a public statement of social hierarchy, a way of saying, you are beneath me, and everyone watching understood exactly what it meant. New Testament scholar Walter Wink, whose work on nonviolence in the Gospels has shaped how many historians read this passage, argued that Jesus was not telling his followers to accept humiliation passively. He was describing a very specific, very deliberate act of resistance. Here is why. If someone backhands you on the right cheek and you turn and offer your left cheek, you have just made it physically impossible for them to backhand you again. A right-handed striker cannot backhand your left cheek without switching to an open palm strike or a fist. And an open-handed slap or a punch in that culture was something different. It was how you struck an equal. It was how you challenged a person you considered your peer. So by turning the other cheek, the person being humiliated forces their aggressor into a choice. Either stop the abuse entirely or acknowledge them as an equal by striking them the way you would strike someone of equal social standing. Either option undermines the entire point of the original backhand. The insult fails. The hierarchy. The striker was trying to reinforce collapses in front of everyone watching. That is not weakness. That is quiet, controlled defiance wrapped inside an act that looks like submission on the surface. Jesus continues in the same passage with a second example. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. Again, this sounds like generosity taken to an extreme. But historian and theologian N.T. Wright has pointed out that this instruction only makes sense once you understand Jewish law and daily clothing customs in that period. In first-century Judea, a person typically wore two garments. An inner garment, often translated as tunic or shirt, and an outer garment, the coat or cloak. Jewish law, rooted in Exodus and reinforced in Deuteronomy, specifically protected a person's outer cloak from being taken as collateral in a debt, because for the poor, that cloak often doubled as their blanket at night. Even if a lender legally seized someone's tunic in a lawsuit over debt, the cloak was meant to remain untouchable. So when Jesus says, "Give your cloak as well," he is describing someone standing in a courtroom, likely stripped down to almost nothing in front of judges, creditors, and onlookers. And in that moment, the shame does not fall on the debtor. It falls publicly on the wealthy creditor who pursued a poor person's last possessions in the first place. The debtor, instead of quietly submitting to being stripped of his dignity, exposes the injustice of the entire system by complying so completely that the greed behind it becomes impossible to ignore. Jesus gives a third example that follows the same pattern. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. This detail is tied directly to Roman military law. Roman soldiers had the legal right, under a practice called angaria, to compel local civilians to carry their equipment for exactly 1 mile. Not further. This was a strict legal limit, put in place partly to prevent abuse of conquered populations, and Roman soldiers who forced someone to carry gear beyond that mile could face military discipline. So imagine a Jewish man in Galilee forced by a Roman soldier to carry his pack for the legally required mile. At the end of that mile, instead of stopping, he keeps walking. He offers to carry it a second mile. Suddenly the soldier is in an uncomfortable position. He is now potentially in violation of his own military regulations. He has to physically ask for his equipment back. The person who had no power in that interaction has just taken control of it without a single act of violence or defiance in the traditional sense. Historian Richard Horsley, who has written extensively about Roman occupation and Jewish resistance in this period, has argued that all three of these examples share a common thread. They are not about accepting abuse. They are about refusing to be degraded while also refusing to meet violence with violence. They expose injustice through radical, unexpected compliance, forcing the person in power to either back down or reveal the ugliness of what they were doing in front of witnesses. This reframes the entire Sermon on the Mount teaching. Jesus was not asking his followers to become doormats. He was teaching them a form of nonviolent resistance that stripped power away from oppressors without requiring his followers to become violent themselves. In a world under Roman occupation, where open rebellion meant crucifixion and quiet submission meant permanent humiliation, Jesus offered his followers a third option. Neither fight nor surrender, but expose the injustice through actions the powerful could not easily punish. So why does this matter to you now? Because for centuries, this passage has been used to tell people, especially people already suffering under abuse or injustice, that the righteous response is silence and submission. But that reading strips away the very context that gives the teaching its power. Jesus was not telling an oppressed and occupied people to simply accept oppression. He was giving them a way to reclaim their dignity inside a system stacked against them, using methods that could not easily be punished by the very people enforcing that system. Understanding this does not erase the deeper spiritual call toward mercy, patience, and love for one's enemies that runs through the rest of the Sermon on the Mount. That call is still there, and it is still demanding. But it reframes what that call actually asks of people. It is not asking anyone to disappear or to accept cruelty as their permanent condition. It is asking for a response that refuses to return violence with violence, while also refusing to let injustice go unnamed. You have heard this phrase your whole life. Turn the other cheek. And now, standing in that first-century courtyard, watching a slap land and a second cheek offered in return, you can see it for what it actually was. Not surrender. A quiet, unmistakable act of defiance wrapped in the shape of peace. Thank you for watching. Let us continue the conversation in the comments section. Do not forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell. Till next time.